Hi, welcome back to the Desire of Ages, Jesus, our perfect pattern for mental health. And today we're going to be in chapter 2. And I've got my trusty Desire of Ages here on an app on my phone. And we're just gonna dive in. For those of you just joining us, this is practical advice and coping strategies for everyday life, traumatic events, or healing the past. So with that, let's get into chapter 2, The Chosen People. For more than 1,000 years, the Jewish people had awaited the Savior's coming. Upon this event, they had rested their brightest hopes. Hope is a really important part of mental health. Without hope, at least a glimmer, even if it's only 1% out of 99, we don't even attempt to get well. Because we don't think there's any reason to, right? If there's no hope of getting well, why would you attempt it? Why would you seek help? Why would you look for tools that can help you to feel better? And this may sound like really destitute, like someone who has zero hope in getting well must be just, like suicidal and totally depressed, or maybe even, have psychotic issues. But really, we can have this hopelessness and maintain a pretty good facade, just like we see in this chapter with the various nations. And it's a pretty scary place to be, and it's a pretty sad place to be. The good news is that we can all get hope from the way we think. And there's ways to encourage ourselves to have hope. For one thing, we can look at evidence around us. There's no evidence that there's zero hope. For one thing, we see life changes all the time. We see people go through all kinds of hardship and trauma. And I mean, I wouldn't even get into the stories, but I'll tell you this. What really impacted me a lot growing up was reading mission story books. For those of you who are Seventh Day Adventists joining us, or even of people of other faith, I'm sure you've heard lots of mission stories. And if you haven't, I would encourage you to dig out some of the older books. And the reason I say the older books is because they don't pull any punches. I mean, they tell you what it was like to be in prison camps, to be in concentration camps. I think of Corrie ten Boom's book. And the reason it's important for us to sometimes see these dire circumstances is because the contrast of how hope got them through is very, very valuable. I have a friend who used to be a specialist trainer in the Air Force, and his job was to train the pilots how to survive if they got shot down under enemy lines. He said one of the most important things they discovered, they did a lot of research before doing this training. And what they told him in this research was one of the most important thing for a POW to survive was having some hope, was having a higher power to look to, and specifically even a loving creator God, and getting more specific, a Christian God, or this, I won't say or, but sometimes when I feel like I say Christian, I feel like I'm boxing up God, because there is a certain concept of God we relate to in Christianity. And for those of other faiths who may be watching, God is a lot bigger than one particular religion. And we're going to see that in this chapter and the next chapter. In fact, it's going to become really clear. And we get back to this piece about hope before I get all ahead of myself. So, right, hope. What I find is you can borrow hope from others. We can borrow faith from others. We want to have our own as well, but until you get there, you can borrow other people. I have done this throughout my life many times, and it has been very effective because I know that these people aren't lying. There's just too many stories. And those seeds of hope guided me through when I felt like I didn't have hope. Now, my hope would often be against myself, that I just wasn't good enough. I couldn't do it. I couldn't choose. I was just too far gone. But there's, lots of different ways we can be hopeless. And I just want you to know that there is something out there for every one of you. If you have this struggle with I just don't think I can change, or I can't change permanently, or I can't change well enough to have optimal mental health. I want you to know you can change. God can empower you, and we can have abundant living regardless of our circumstances, because we can have joy and peace in our minds, and that can permeate our whole being. Okay, so that was the first part of that. And we didn't even get through the first paragraph. She goes on to talk about how in song and prophecy, they had the written word, they had stories handed down, they had the traditions that they were practicing. Their whole culture was related to a coming Messiah, and yet they didn't recognize him when he came. We need to be really careful that we don't misunderstand our own mental health journey. You know, we can have all the tools, we can have the books, we can have the Bible, we can have prayer, we can have all these things, and yet we can misunderstand our role in gaining mental health. And this part of mental health is different for each person. Sometimes it's that we need to embrace all the emotions. Sometimes we're afraid of certain emotions. We have stigmas against certain emotions, and so we avoid them. Sometimes it's that we think we're just emotional beings and there's just no way to control that. There's, you know, our thoughts come and go, and it is what it is, and we don't really have control over that. Sometimes we get caught up in the idea that it's our circumstances that shape us, which is true, absolutely true. And yet we have the ability to shape our thoughts in conjunction with our circumstances and reform how we think about those, how we let them impact us. It's very empowering, actually. So we want to be careful that just because we have all this knowledge, we are not missing out on having this abundance of life. She goes on to say, he had no form or comeliness, and they saw in him no beauty that they should desire him. Lots of old words in this book. It's just such a literary masterpiece. But comeliness, of course, is just meaning he wasn't Thor, or, you know, like he didn't have like this chiseled features, and he wasn't like this beautiful person that was like, wow, look, oh, did you see Jesus of Nazareth? Wow, like he's so impressive. He did not have that. He sort of blended in. He was an average Joe as far as his appearance. That was unexpected. Quite often in our mental health journey, we have self-defeating beliefs, and quite often, all the time, we face self-defeating beliefs. And one of these can be the self-defeating belief that our worth depends on our looks, our achievements, how people. Another one is approval addiction, where, you know, we want people to approve of us, and sometimes that comes off in body image. We're seeing so much body dysmorphia within media, and I see it on like social Facebook, and I hear people talking about it, and it can range from just not feeling comfortable in one's skin to complete identity crisis of like, I don't feel like, you know, what I've been given is enough, and I have to change it. And I understand that there are some rare occurrences where we actually have a DNA disconnect. There's different disorders. One's called chimera, where you can have multiple DNA. So you can literally have the DNA in your mind of like your brain and your, you know, blood could be one DNA, and you could have reproductive organs of a different DNA. This is a legit condition. It's called chimera. You can look it up. It's actually kind of one of the ways I think it happens is when there's twins in the womb, could be fraternal twins or identical twins, and one twin absorbs one egg of the twin absorbs the other one, and so both actually keep their DNA and grow together. So you can have these extreme situations where it's like there is some biological piece to it, to feeling like, oh, I don't feel quite right. I know my own story. If you wanted to look up on my website, I never felt comfortable in my own skin. Definitely did not feel like a girl, and really struggled with that. I won't get into that. But this idea that we, something going on and we're not comfortable with who we are, our own persona, so to speak. And here we see Jesus, who has this, he could have prepped ahead of time. He was God before he became human. And he most certainly could have, given himself a few tweaks here and there, made sure he came out pretty dashingly handsome. But he chose not to do that. And I'm convinced one of those reasons is because so many of us struggle with our own appearance. And here he's showing us how you can go through life and not be the, perfect beauty pageant person. I want to reference so many pop things. I'm trying not to. Okay. So there we go. We have an example where Jesus was able to deal with not having perfect skin, rugged, chiseled features, and all the things that might have been expected of him. And we can have that too. Our worth is not dependent on our skin and our features, and but the fact that the great God of the universe sent his son to die for us. I mean, that's invaluable worth. And, just blows my mind how much worth that alone puts on us. So, and that's given to everyone. There's no exceptions there. Okay, let's keep going. In the call of Abraham, the Lord had said, I will bless thee, and thou shalt be a blessing, and then all the families of the earth will be blessed. But the Israelites fixed their hope upon worldly greatness. They departed from the commandments of God and followed the ways of the heathen. Every reformation was followed by deeper apostasy. It's interesting in this chapter and also in the next chapter, and I'm stealing this from David Asscherick. He does the Desire of Ages, called DA with DA. I love this series, and I encourage you to watch that one as well, where he goes through the Desire of Ages for his worship. It's this idea that you've got the heathens and the Gentiles and the Jews, and basically that covers the entire population. And some people have it and some people don't. Sometimes they have it and sometimes they don't. So there's no right group of people, which I think is really important to see in this chapter. This particular chapter is written focused on the Jewish nation, the Israelite nation, because that's where Jesus was coming from, right? He was a line of the tribe of Judah. So of course makes sense that's where it's coming from. But I think it's important to realize when you're reading these words, whether it's Jewish or Israelite or heathen, and there's sometimes these negative things said about them, the reality is we have these negativities right now, even in our cultures. So it doesn't matter what culture you're from, we all know there's bad apples. And unfortunately, there's probably a lot of bad apples compared to good apples. Just what we see around us, and probably going to get flagged for that one, but unfortunately, it is what it is, and truth is going to set us free. So we don't want to hide from the truth. There's no way of changing. We can't change without confession, right? We have to confess these things. We have to know our own biases. What do we see? What do we around us? So what's really interesting is that there's this mix, and here when they were picked out to be the chosen people, it was because they were to be this beacon of light, not because there was something so special about them. They were like, oh, I'm going to set you apart. You're the only ones who are going to be saved, which was eventually how they kind of interpret it. And with mental health, it can be like that too. There's people who feel like if you don't do, a certain therapy, or if you don't think a certain way, then you can't have mental wellness. If you have ADHD or autism, or if you don't, find a way to be normal and fit into society's kind of box, then you're never going to really find true happiness. And so there's a lot of behavior modification in mental health rather than dealing with what you are struggling with internally. It's the internal struggles. We are our worst enemy. We're the ones who are going to hurt ourselves the most, regardless of what's going on around us. Now, I'm actually, doing a talk on abuse, and there's definitely abuse out there, and there's by no means any excuse for that. And there should be accountability for that. At the same time, I do not want to undermine the power that each person has, regardless of the circumstances. It says, many a sincere observer of the heathen rites learned from the Hebrews the meaning of the service divinely ordained, and in faith grasped the promise of a Redeemer. So, right here we see that mental health is for everyone. If we're gonna, relate it to now, there isn't a select group of people. There isn't a select methodology. And then I just want to jump ahead just briefly to chapter 3, because there's a really important quote here, and this ties this together about no one is left out. Okay. Outside the Jewish nation, there were men who foretold the appearance of a divine instructor. These men were seeking for truth, and to them the spirit of inspiration was marked. One after another, like stars in the darkened heavens, such teachers had arisen. Their words of prophecy kindled hope in the hearts of thousands in the Gentile world. This is one of the things when I look at this, that there's teachers outside of, God's little pocket of believers, chosen believers. This is really important because I struggled for a little while recommending Dr. David Burns' books, because he wasn't a Seventh-day Adventist for one, and he wasn't a Christian for two, or at least he didn't proclaim to be. And then third thing was really he talks about Buddhism and New Age movement, which, kind of makes me a little uncomfortable for some really philosophical reasons, and also some biblical doctrine reasons. And so I was like, I don't know, should I recommend it? Should I just stick with Dr. Neil Nedley's book? And I think there's another doctor, not doctor, excuse me. There's another pastor. He's a Baptist pastor, William Backus, and he has some good books. And so I kind of stuck with those for a while. But the problem is that those books were based off of David's research and work. And they even quoted him. And I thought, why would I not go to the source? If these men of God are quoting him and using his material, why wouldn't I go to the source? Why get it secondhand? And if I respect them, if I think this book is okay and it's based on someone else's research, why wouldn't I go right to that research? So that was a shift for me. And these kind of verses really helped me, where I read, wait a minute, God had his teachers everywhere, the whole planet. North America, South America, Europe, throughout the Aztecs, the Mayans, God has his people. God loves all of them. They're all in his hand, and he's teaching and leading and guiding them. And I personally believe, and I won't state names, I personally believe there are some very famous people, I'm trying to be this really careful here, that God inspired, that we would not consider Christian. I'm gonna leave it at that, but I have evidence for it right here. And I think we need to be really careful about that, because when it comes to mental health, we want to go to what is going to work for you. And the thing I have seen over and over and over is that Team CBT is the most effective, because it doesn't, remember we talked about how, you want to just get boxed up into one idea. With Team CBT, no method is off limits if it'll work, and if it'll work for this client in particular. And so we're not stuck. We're not like, oh, we're only going to use CBT. We're only going to use certain tools within CBT, which often I see, there's like 10 tools that you'll use over and over, sometimes only ever 2. I've seen CBT therapists that pretty much just identify the distortions, come up with positive thoughts, and that's it. It's like 2 tools. Whereas David has 123 or something like that. And that's just David. In Team CBT, we're willing to look way beyond that. And I know some colleagues and they use acceptance and commitment therapy. I know colleagues who use emotion focused therapy. So yeah, nothing's off the table. We want to figure out what works. Okay, maybe this is going to be longer than I thought. During the centuries that followed, this is the Israelites, suffered from oppression of heathen foes until the conviction became fixed that their prosperity depended on their obedience to the law of God. But with too many of the people, obedience was not prompted by love. The motive was selfish. They rendered outward service to God as a mean of attaining national greatness. Okay, what has that to do with mental health? Well, just take this analogy and make it personal. We can be motivated to have self-growth and self-improvement for selfish reasons. If the focus is constantly just about self, like I need to take care of me, I need, self-compassion, I need I, which don't get me wrong, there's plenty of clients that I'm trying to teach self-compassion to. But if the focus is only inward, you will not find true healing. And your mental health journey will be stagnant at some point. We are creatures that need each other, and we need relationships, and we need to be involved in helping each other. It's really important. The other piece of this was this outward service, okay, to achieve greatness. Again, this is related to self-defeating belief that we've got to be perfect, can't make mistakes, we need to achieve a lot. The flip to that is we never in team, and I'm saying we when I say, I'm thinking of the collaborative colleagues that I have anyways. In mental health, we are not trying to say just be yourself and don't worry about anything else. You are who you are. It is what it is. The reality is it's absolutely okay and even encouraged to try to achieve greatness, and nothing wrong with that. In fact, that's kind of the motto in Team CBT. We want to fail as fast as we can. We want to make mistakes because that helps us be better. I mean, that's the goal. The goal is to be better, to be more efficient with our clients, to empower them quicker, to help them find healing, so that we can help more people. We can help harder cases. The more skilled we get, the more we can take on more complicated cases. So the goal is to get better. The goal is to achieve greatness, but that's not the focus. The focus is actually focused on failing, on making the mistakes, on being okay with that, on accepting it. And that's pretty hard to do when self is on the throne, because self doesn't like that. Self doesn't like to be wrong. No, likes to be right. It's why we see so much polarization in the media on topics, whether it's vaccines or whatever. There's such a polarization because we like to be right. And so it's really one of these things, these key pieces to mental health is finding that balance between my inward work and what I need to accept for myself, and also my outward work, behaviors, actions, and so on. And the other balance is self-compassion, and also empathy and compassion for others, and living a life for others, and finding that balance, which isn't always easy, and sometimes we need to talk that through with someone. They did not become the light of the world, but shut themselves away from the world in order to escape temptation to idolatry. God had placed restrictions on their associations with idolaters, but this teaching had been misinterpreted. It was intended to prevent them from conforming to the practices of the heathen, but it was used to build a wall of separation between the Israelite and all other nations. The Jews looked upon Jerusalem as their heaven, and they were actually jealous lest the Lord should show mercy to the Gentiles. Ooh. Right, it's easy to look at it and go, oh, shame on them, but we do this kind of thing. So let's look at this in terms of mental health. Becoming the light of the world. This back and forth and being connected is really important for our mental health. And believe it or not, helping others can be an enormous tool in your own mental health journey. And you don't have to have it all figured out. We are all on this road together. And while there's certain tools that we get, the further along the journey we get, like now it's hard for me to become anxious. I get like little twinges of anxiety nowadays, but it's pretty hard for me to make myself anxious because the tools work. And that's the great thing. But I know what it's like to have been there. And I can definitely get into the role plays and pretend. And, a lot of my colleagues be like, are you sure you're not really anxious? Like, oh, when you've been there, you can go back and really feel those. So yeah, part of your mental health journey is for you to reach out to others. How can you be supportive? There's this really idea that, well, I'm so emotionally drained. I have nothing to offer. You do have something to offer. You can offer your ears. It doesn't take much to offer your ears and listen to what other people are going through. And no matter how low you are, I'll tell you, reaching out to others and listening to what they're going through is extremely impactful in a mental health journey. So don't think you need to arrive and have all these successes in order to share and to just listen. Really, in fact, sometimes it's better if you're only partway there, because you keep your lips tight, right? Because you don't have the answers. There's times where people call me and I don't have all the answers. There's some pretty traumatic situations out there, and they're in the throes of it, and they care so much about somebody else, and how do you fix it? And the idea is not to fix it. That's not what I mean by being there for others, but to be there as a social support and emotional support and a listening ear. So, okay, let's keep going. The people in their darkness and oppression, and the rulers, thirsting for power, longed for the coming of the one who would vanish their enemies and restore the kingdom to Israel. They had studied the prophecies, but without spiritual insight. Thus, they overlooked the scriptures that pointed to the humiliation of Christ's first advent, and misapplied those that speak of the glory of his second coming. Pride obscured their vision. They interpreted prophecy in accordance with their selfish desires. Pride can make us kind of cling to certain ideologies, especially worldly philosophies that sound really good. There are things in psychology that just don't mesh up with our philosophy as Christians, our philosophies as creationists, and even our philosophies as people, truth seekers. There's just the research isn't there. Now, there's lots of people that love it, and so it seems like there's some research to back it up because there's so many people liking it. You need to keep in mind that the placebo effect is very, very high when it comes to mental health. Between 30 and 50%. That's how much it can affect you just believing something. I mean, that's incredible. That's that's half at the high end. And so when people buy in, then there can look like lots of good results. Unfortunately, it doesn't last. And it can be, I've seen people hold on to ideas and keep repeating it over and over, and they become like evangelists, because the more they say it, they're hoping that it won't be true, that what they're starting to doubt. I'm not going to pick apart any particular philosophy right now, but I want you to be aware that it can be really hard because of pride. We don't want to let go. We love this idea, especially philosophies that sort of give us a little, they're there, it's okay, it's not your fault kind of little pat. How do I get well if I have no power? If I'm subject to what's being done to me, and my only option is behavioral, my only option is to get out, how is that going to help mental health? I don't know. Well, I found a lot more gems in this chapter than I thought I would, a lot more. So I really encourage you to read the book along with me. Again, this was chapter 2 in Desire of Ages, and we're going to be doing chapter 3 next. So thank you for watching. Please hit the subscribe and the like button and notifications, because I'm not sure how these are gonna keep coming if, nobody's watching them or no one's interested. So with that, have a great day. And remember, we're all real people. So please be kind in the comments below.